Hello and greetings of peace. I am Louay Safi, and this is the first in a series of lectures intended to look at globalization and understand its meaning, its evolution, and its direction. We are going to also focus on the impact of monotheism on globalization. You may ask, why looking into the connection between religion and globalization? Some might even go further to say, well, is there a connection to begin with? Apparently, the connection is not clear. We don't see the connection. In fact, what we see is that the gradual divorce of modern society from religious sentiments and principles. And for that reason, I decided to put together this lecture series to try to delve deeply to see how globalizations came about. In fact, I just published a book on that subject under the title Islam and the Trajectory of Globalization. And Islam is one of the Abrahamic traditions that contributed to the rise of the global society we are confronting today or trying to understand. Now, a lot has been written really on globalization in the last 3 decades since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Much of it has been around economics, technology, communication, to lesser extent sociology and society. But in this series, we are going to look into other dimensions that are deeper than only the current interaction among human beings. We're going to look at the inspirations that were at the beginning of the whole globalization project. We are going to also look at the forces responsible for the rise of modern society. These forces need to be understood, and their connection to the past must be also understood. After all, we humans are historical creatures. We can't really understand ourselves without understanding the history that led to the evolution of human society. And that's what we are going to do today. But in the current lecture, I would like really to engage 4 key concepts that are at the foundation of the 2 ideas or the foundation of globalizations, and as well as how they relate to monotheism. So let us begin really by defining globalization. What is globalization? There are many definitions. I would like to look at 3 of them because they are relevant to our discussion today and in the subsequent lectures. The first is offered by Manfred Steger. He is a professor who has focused in the last 20 years on trying to understand globalization. And I would recommend one of his important work entitled Globalization, a short summary. And this definition comes from that book. He defines globalization as the expansion and intensification of social relations and consciousness across time and space, or world time and world space. And by that he means over geography, the geography of the globe, as well as human history. We also have another definition that offered by another student of history and of sociology as well, Robert Cohen. Try to define globalization by linking it to globalism. Globalization as a process is linked to globalism as really content or culture. So here the definition goes that globalization is the process by which globalism becomes increasingly thin. And we'll come back to this notion of thin and thick globalization. It's an important concept. Mainly it has to do with the extent to which interdependence is intensified. To what extent human societies, different societies, are linked to one another and depend on each other for economic, social, cultural, educational, even entertainment, which seems to be the thickest at this moment in comparison to previous periods. We could also, well, I mean, these are two definitions. I would like to offer this definition, which this is my definition. Globalization is the gradual convergence of public ideals and social experiences across world cultures. So in the first definition by Steger, the focus is really on the expansion and across time and space. The expansion of cultures and institutions that belong to a particular society beyond its borders to engulf the entire humanity. The Cohen definition, we'll come back to it soon, because that definition really focuses on globalism, and we will talk about that when we move to talk about globalism. For now, let me say a few words about these key terms that we came across. The expansion. Of course, the expansion that we are experiencing today is the expansion of Western society and Western experience and Western institutions. By Western, I mean those societies that have their roots in Northwest Europe, the area that historians call the Occident, as opposed to the Orient. The Occident roughly is the area where Germany, France, and Britain is located, as well as the Scandinavian countries. And it could expand also, it's expanded really gradually to engulf Eastern Europe up until the Russian main centers that are part of the European continent. So that expansion started around the middle of the 17th century with the colonial projects that were undertaken by countries like Spain, Portugal, the Dutch Republic, later on the Dutch Empire, where the Netherlands is located today, and of course Britain and France, the major colonial powers in the 20th century. So these are the expansions. And we have to understand that colonialism is part and parcel of what made globalization is possible, because what that colonial expansion did is that to create convergence. That's where the definition that I provided comes in. The convergence is a key term. We'll come back to it because it's part of the current debate about the direction of globalization. Are we going to integrate further and become more interdependent, or are we going to circle the wagon and be divided into different civilizations, as Huntington suggested, that are vying with one another? We'll come back to that discussion in the second lectures. But for now, let us say one more thing about the globalization. The question is how old the globalization is. Most of us are aware of globalization as a term and phenomena that started as a concept that started to become used widely in the literature around the early 90s, right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Because the Soviet Union was an anti-systemic force trying to confront liberalism and capitalism and try to create a different world based on the Marxian conception of history. Now, with the failure of the Soviet Union, then scholars in the West become more boldened about the nature of our moment. This is moment of convergence and globalization. That what, for example, Francis Fukuyama really told us around the 1989 when he published his essay, then became a book, The End of History. Again, we will discuss aspects of that relate to our own interest and our own topic in the second lecture. So again, the question, how old is globalization? Has it started in the 90s? Or has it started with European colonization? Or has it been really an earlier phenomena? Of course, the term is not there, but that does not mean that the phenomena was not there. Sometimes it takes a long time for us who are engaged in scholarly activities and understanding of society and history. It might take a long time before we can really understand the presence of a particular patterns or phenomenon in our human experience. But this could have started much earlier. And as I would like to argue, there are some evidence that globalization is an early experience of humanity. In fact, we find a scholar like Karl Jaspers, the German philosopher and sociologist, suggested in his book, The Origin and Goal of History, which was published around 1949, right after World War II. This was a very shocking moment in human history, in European history in particular, because World War II came after World War I. Both almost wiped out the European continent and European civilization. Had it not been for the United States, and to lesser extent for the Soviet Union then Europe would have been really destroyed completely, and there was no way to rebuild it in the way it was rebuilt with the help particularly of the United States after World War II. So that gave a lot of thoughts to many people about what happened. How could this advanced civilization try it wiped out around 70 million Europeans and of course people outside of Europe. But between World War I and World War II, the conservative estimate that about 80 million humans vanished in a very short period of time as a result of a human destructive behavior through these two destructive wars. And so it seems that Jaspers recognized that we need to look at Europe from outside Europe as well. We can't just reduce European experience to just the Enlightenment and look at it as it started with the Enlightenment, or even the most sort of those who went in history deep to try to understand modern society went only to the religious reformation that took place in the 15th century, 14th and 15th centuries. And then it continued through the 16th, 17th, until we started to see new thinking, new ideas around the 17th century. So he suggested that maybe we should look at the axial age around 18 to 1500 BCE. That's to say about half a century before Christ. And the reason for that is that this was the moment where there were a number of civilizations that came to the fore, grounded in the major religions that we know today, like Judaism in the Near East, Buddhism in India, and probably Central Asia, and Taoism and other major religions, Hinduism, that were a part of the rise of modern society. They were at the root of that development of humanity from that point, which is called the axial age, because that term was introduced by Jaspers to say that this was a very important time for us to contemplate, to understand ourselves today. We'll come back to this concept because I think we have a lot of evidence, and I would like to present some of that evidence to show that really our current global moment is rooted in the axial age, indeed, or around the axial age. Not only that, but there has been a breakthrough. What led us from this multiplicity of civilizations into our moment of singular civilization, it looks, although this question is not settled, it is contested, but nevertheless, we would like to explore further to see whether there are some meaning to that. That leads us to talk about the second key concept I would like to introduce today, globalism. Globalism, this is a simple definition. Globalism is the shared attitudes and values necessary for bringing culturally diverse societies to engage in mutually beneficial relationships and activities on both the local and global levels. Globalism, in other words, is the culture and the institutional manifestation of that culture that constitute what we call globalization. This is something for us to really look into and see whether there is any evidence to support this claim. Now, the difficulty here, of course, before I talk about the current globalization or globalism, the modern globalism, one of the difficulties we find today is that we don't have any other globalism to compare with the current globalism. You see, part of our ability to understand society is to take comparative studies. In fact, that's what we do also when we try to understand human psychology. Or for that matter, when we try to understand different governments or governmental systems. But how about globalism? It looks like you have only one globalism, modern globalism. It looks like never before we had something like our moment of a global order. Well, I would like really to also say that perhaps we have another moment that we will look into in the subsequent lectures. There has been other moments where we could really use to understand our current moment, because the similarities is quite staggering and the experience is quite interrelated. I wouldn't really say much about that today. I will leave it to future talks and lectures that are part of this series. But for now, I would like to look at some of the positive and negative aspects of the current globalism, modern globalism. Here is a list of, probably you see on the screen, some of the positive, it's not exclusivist or is not like complete list. This is a partial list. I thought maybe we could look at some examples of positive elements of modern globalism. One of them would be general education, trying to educate everybody. through a very systematic way from the primary school to the secondary, all through the higher education. We also have, science has become the basis for problem solving and decision making. That is very important. Everything from nature to organization to international relations to state structure to public policy, we try to bring scientific element to help us make the best decisions. That is also something quite visible today. The accountability of the power holders. Never in the past there were institutions that were designed to make sure that those who hold power can be brought to accountability. They can be questioned about what they are doing, how they are spending public fund. The system is still imperfect for reasons we'll see later. But nevertheless, this is part of what has been achieved so far, at least in terms of the theory and understanding and a good level of experimentation. International law and organization. This is something that is new. We'll come back again to go in more depth to understand what that means and what the significance of having the United Nations, organization, and to try to organize our relationship across culture and political borders on the basis of international law. Again, we have not gone enough in this process, but the process has already put in order. So that's the positive. How about the negative? Let us look at some of the negative elements quickly. One thing probably we could look into is the rejection of transcendental ethics. And by that I mean the ethics of duty, that people have responsibilities. They have duties to their families, to their elders, to their parents, to their society, and these duties are part and parcel of what make a human life more meaningful and a better way to organize and interact with one another. Not everybody today really agree with that. We have much of our ethics today is based on utility, on what what is in it for us. Sometimes we use common good as a concept of utility, and that hopefully would engulf a larger proportion of society. But this, as we will see, has been shown to be not enough to create a meaningful life, a life that bring meaning and justice to people. Another negative element we have today is the deconstruction of the human sexuality. I know this is a very controversial topic. I don't want to really get into it. But, for example, we have difficulty today to define who is a man and who is a woman. And that is, of course, is challenging because at the core of society is the family. And failing to really build society on a functioning family is a question that should be part of public debate, and we have not done enough to address it. We now tend to politicize any topic and make it difficult for people to talk about it without being really labeled or even being cancelled. Social hierarchy is part of the negative things that we experience today. Of course, I don't mean like social hierarchy in terms of having ranks within organizations and in society based on certain obligations and duties, but I'm talking about this gap between the middle class, the rich, and the poor, and what we have been seeing first in the developing world and now more in the in the industrialized world, we have seen that the middle class is disappearing. And if the middle class disappears, then forget about democracy. We are going to revert into aristocracy or oligarchy, maybe more real word to use today. And we already have oligarchs in our societies, and they are pushing hard to fixate that system, to establish a system of really hierarchy where there's a huge gap between those who have and those who have not. And that, of course, has to do also with this unrestrained capitalism. Capitalism that refuses to be regulated, even when it fails to do the right thing, still it refuses to be regulated. And our politicians seem to be under the influence of the oligarchs and those who really represent this unrestrained capitalism. That leads us to talk about the third key concept I would like to focus on today in this lecture, which is the rational or rationalism as a key concept to understand globalization, religion, and our current challenges and our current moment. Rationalism became the new thinking and the most powerful element for communication and for progress, really around the early 17th century, late 16th century. Perhaps the most known figure who stand at the early moments of modern rationalization or modern rationalism or modern thinking is the French philosopher René Descartes, who was, by the way, not a citizen of France, but citizen of the Dutch Republic, the first republic ever to be built in Western Europe. Descartes tried in his philosophy to ground our knowledge on our self-learning, or he wanted to establish and ground certainty in human subjectivity. And hence this famous statement of his, which we call the Cartesian cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, which really means that all learning are grounded in our human subjectivity, in our consciousness, in our ability to be responsive to everything around us and have the rational capacity to analyze everything around us. And to him, that was all what we need in order to develop our societies and learning. His student, Benedict, or Baruch Spinoza, as he is also known by his Jewish name, was even more influential in developing the new thinking, the modern rationalism. And he has done that in two of his important books by looking critically at theology and at politics in European society. Perhaps his book of ethics is one of the most important books produced in early modern Europe around the 17th century, and was quite influential for that matter. If we look at how that book has eventually impacted modern thinking, I would argue that we can trace the four worldviews that form the foundation of intellectual activities to Spinoza's arguments: idealism, positivism, and materialism. These are three ways, three systems of thinking, but they are all grounded in different ways of looking at the world. Or to use more philosophical term, they are grounded in different metaphysical understanding, meaning understanding the nature of reality based on the complete picture of what is life and what is being. Idealism grew in Germany, and probably the figures that are quite associated with it is Immanuel Kant, Fichte, and Hegel, to name few important thinkers. If you want me to say who is the most influential, I would say number one would be Kant, and in the second place would be Hegel. And in fact, much of our liberal understanding today, all those ideas and systems that are grounded in liberalism, in many ways are rationally explained and defended by these two German philosophers. Positivism that was developed more first in Germany, but equally in Britain and France. Names that are associated with positivism would be Leibniz, Christian Wolff, who is also a student of Leibniz and Hume in Britain, and Ken Dorset also in France probably would be one of those who represent that worldview that inform intellectual analysis and understanding of the world. Finally, materialism, maybe names like Feuerbach, Marx, Nietzsche, all of them are German, would be a good example of this particular strand of thinking that continue to be influential. In fact, the second and the third has historically sort of worked together to try to undermine idealism, because both of them share a lot together. We can really ground them under one rubric, or to really categorize them under one rubric, which is realism. So when we talk about realism today, we are also talking about materialism and positivism, which has gained the upper hand. Idealism has been on the retreat. In recent times, few philosophers tried to come back and reaffirm idealism as an important system of thinking to deal with our current problems. Philosophers like Charles Taylor in Canada or John Rawls in the United States have done a lot of work. To some extent, Habermas in Germany have done a lot of work around to try to deal with this. Here is a graph that tries to explain the relationship between these different worldviews. You could see idealism and realism, they seem to be in competition with one another, but realism has been informed by a number of sources. Probably it has been informed by a lot of sources from transcendentalism, meaning grounding reality in unseen world and forces that we don't see. And of course, different school of thoughts conceive them differently. naturalism, materialism, and positivism, while idealism continues to be reliant completely, or to great extent, I shouldn't say completely, because it has incorporated elements of realism, but it relies definitely big time on transcendentalism. Now, there is a relationship between these two. This is a healthy relationship. I call it here the idealism-realism tension. This tension is very important for us today because we don't want to really be completely idealist, so we ignore a lot of the material and positivistic things that are important for our life, nor I would argue would like to be completely realists, ignoring the importance of transcendental values and ideals, because these are the ideals, as I said, that are grounded in duty, and nothing can advance ethical behavior in society more than when our ethics is grounded in transcendentalism. Now, this is a big debate. Again, I know this is a contested proposition, but I would like in the subsequent lectures to try to shed light on it and engage the different views, acknowledging my bias more toward idealism, although I believe realism is also important for the healthy growth of society. That leads me to talk about monotheism. Maybe have a few words about monotheism. And what do I mean by monotheism? Of course, monotheism, as we all know, is about the belief in a singular deity. There is only one God, one creator, God who is the creator and the one who who is engaging also in the evolution of human history. This is a very Abrahamic idea or belief. And monotheism, really for the most part, grew out of the Abrahamic traditions. Now, the Abrahamic traditions are none other than the three religions that belong to the tradition of Abraham. That's to say, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These three traditions really share the same narrative about the meaning of life, its beginning and its end, as well as they share almost the same transcendental ideals. These ideals can be found in the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, as well as in the Quran. Now, the ideals of the Abrahamic ideals, as I call them today, these are the four important ideals that are grounded in the Abrahamic traditions, and in fact, we can see them manifest themselves in their first, order in the primordial form in the life and practice of Prophet Abraham. Rational pursuit of truth, that truth can be pursued rationally, that the human mind thinking is part and parcel of identifying true faith from false faith. Truth from falsehood can be distinguished, not completely, but to a great extent through a rational pursuit, including, of course, I'm not talking about just deduction and induction, the analysis and synthesis activities of the rational mind, but also about intuitive understanding, but that sometimes can be supported by evidence and sometimes is completely grounded in faith. The second important Abrahamic ideal is moral agency. All Abrahamic traditions insist that every human being is responsible not only for himself, but for his family and his surrounding, his community, and must take serious action towards what's going on in the world. Cannot be passive or cannot be like ignoring what's going on and try to abandon his or her social responsibilities. The third important element of Abrahamic ideals is the understanding that human life has a purpose, that human history has a purpose. We don't live just in vain. We are not just people who come to life and then disappear, and that's it. All the experience and knowledge and contribution we have done to this world will disappear with us, not to be seen again. This is not an Abrahamic or monotheistic belief. Followers of Judaism, Christianity, Islam believe in varying degrees, of course, that there is a resurrection where people will come back in a different, human condition that will be held accountable for what they have done in this life, but also that this second life is a ever-ending and more meaningful than this first experience. And the final element of the Abrahamic ideals would be this important notion of equal dignity. In fact, as I will try to illustrate later, the only way we argue today that people are equal is on the basis of the faith that grew out of the Abrahamic tradition. There is no rational argument for us today to make to prove that people are equal. In fact, if we'd like to use our analytical tools and our observation, probably will argue that people are not equal. In fact, there is a lot of evidence to show that people are not equal. But nevertheless, part of the modern affirmation and part of the notion of globalization and the need of it is that human beings are equal. They are the sons and daughters of one pair of male and female. That is the Abrahamic or the monotheistic narrative. Let me show you here how this one of the four ideals have been affirmed both in the Bible and in the Quran, which is the first ideal that we have to have a rational pursuit of the truth. Here is what we find in the Bible. An argument between Abraham and his father. Abraham, as a young boy still, probably teenager at this stage, who is rejecting polytheism, the worshipping of idols, on the basis of rational argument. He tells his father, why would you worship these things while you make them yourself and you carry them? His father was involved in the making of idols. And they cannot respond to you, they can't help you, you carry them, you make them, and then everybody worship them. Of course, there is more than that in the Bible, but I would not want at this point to engage the whole argument, but I would like to show that how the Bible, and then we find a similar argument in the Quran. Here is, of course, this is a longer statement, several verses of the Quran, but also it adds new information that we don't see in the Bible, that Abrahamic journey to faith gone through this sort of reflection about who is the creator, who is God. Is God within the stars? Are these stars represent God or maybe gods? Because there are many stars. Then he concluded, no, it can be. Then he considered the moon and then the sun. And after contemplation, he came to the conclusion that he will not really worship any of these things he sees around him, but he will worship the being who created everything. And so this is also an argument, shows the importance of rational analysis in the Abrahamic tradition. I should perhaps now conclude this first lecture by saying that, well, many of the things that I have referred to today and mentioned in my talk will be part of our discussion in the next chapters. I brought them in this very raw form in order to stimulate the discussion and give you some taste of what is at stake here. What's the question? Of course, I think what is at stake is not only the intellectual exercise of understanding, but also the way we are now we are experiencing globalization. It seems that we are at the point of major transformation. And unfortunately, this transformation also, despite the many good things, is creating a lot of more miseries. We see the rise in the corruption around the world. Authoritarian regimes continue to oppress their people, and the whole community does little, particularly in the Middle East and North Africa and Africa in general, as well as in South America. We see this huge wave of migrants who are fleeing the south into the north. We see Western society start to fragment. Identity politics is on the rise. That, of course, doesn't mean that the end of the world. It means that we are facing a real challenge, and we need to think about it, and we need to broaden the basis of our thinking. And one way to do that is really to understand globalization, because globalization took place at the latest stage of modernism. Of course, we had colonial powers expanding from Europe, but you cannot call that globalization in the real sense, because this was a hierarchical order whereby Europe dictated itself on other societies and never considered them to be equal. We seem to come in the 20th centuries more toward the idea of equal people, communities with equal dignity and humanity that deserve compassion and consideration. And that really showed up in the institutionalization of international law and the formation of the UN. But since then, a lot has been done to undermine both international law and international organizations, particularly the United Nations. So it's a moment for us to think about what's going on. Do we have any way to analyze it in deeper way? Are there other forms of globalism that we can use to compare and contrast? And I would suggest that yes, there is another, at least one model of globalism that preceded our modern globalism and also came out of a monotheistic tradition for reasons also we'll discover later. So stay tuned, and hopefully we will cover a lot of grounds, and I will make sure in this and subsequent lectures I will put a link to an open access copy of my book that also deals not exactly with the same issues, but almost with the same issues, so that can be of benefit to those who would like to explore further. I would also put additional sources for people who and followers of this course and series of lectures who would like to learn more. So with this, we come to the conclusion, thank you for watching and staying to this moment, and I'll see you in the second lecture of this series.